Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Sunday Night Breakdown. Daniel Ratledge and Dave Forrester with you to go through all the action in British basketball this week. Dave, we're going to have to do it. I
Yeah,
didn't really want to do it, but we're going to have to do it. As I'm sure our audience knows, I hate the politics of basketball. I have no interest in it at all. I like the games, the players, the numbers, the stats,
yeah,
the records, all of that. The BS that goes on around it, don't let my last name confuse you. I have no interest in it. And that is what this podcast is about. It's about games, it's about players, it's about coaches, it's about stats. And every now and then we can't help but talk about politics. So, full disclosure, Dave and I talked about doing an emergency podcast last Wednesday when the whole license fee, uh, I don't know what word to use, thing
thing.
happened.
Yeah,
But I was commentating on Wednesday night, and the irony that Sam Decker and Mia Oni were playing in the game I was commentating on was not lost on me at all. So obviously, Grant reached out to Dave, and as I broadly agreed with what Dave said on the SLB show, I figured there'd be no need by the time we got to here, and we'd just be able to get on with the game. So if you want to know Dave's long form view, I recommend listening to the SLB show, but turning off 2 minutes before the end because the last bit was rubbish. Um, but you've forgotten that you called me a bed blocker, Dave.
Oh, cool. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I forgot that. Yes.
The jet lag. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, so I heard that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
but seemingly things have escalated since last Wednesday. So I don't, much as I would like to, I don't think we can ignore what's happened since then. And as you had your say the other day, Dave,
Yeah.
let me go first on this. Let me
Be
get
my
it.
guest.
So first of all, the interview with Chris Grant on Hoops Fix with Sam the other day. I like the fact that the first group that Chris Grant mentioned was the fans, because I'm actually going to speak now on behalf of the fans, the people who spend their money every week to watch this league, whoever runs the league. And I'm not arrogant enough to say that I speak on behalf of all fans, but I'm pretty confident from what I've seen on social media. I've obviously been at two games this weekend. I've spoke to people. I'm pretty sure I can speak on behalf of most of the fans. And the prevailing view that I've come across is we don't want this. We don't want this. We don't want our governing body and our elite clubs arguing back and forth like some he said, she said, Jerry Springer show. We don't want people from outside of basketball looking in and going, what the hell is that sport all about? What is going on? We don't want the Europeans laughing at us and going, look at the crazy Brits. How come they can never get it together? We want the leaders to pull into one direction in one common goal. We want the common goal to be growth. We do want growth. We want more facilities. We want better teams. We want more British players. We want better British players. But we want the growth to be organic and sustainable. We don't want genetically modified growth. We've had that. We've seen that. It gives you cancer and it kills you. Last summer, our league and its history got thrown in the bin. And you know how much I like the history. You know how much I've kept the history, trying to keep the history of this sport alive. And it was just burnt on the basis of genetically modified growth by people who thought they knew better, who thought money was the answer, who thought they were smarter. And guess what? They weren't. We remember the Cook Group and Chris Wright and Barry Marshall and Ed Simons and John Hall and do I need to go on? We remember the Leopards and the Towers and the City Royals and the Giants and on and on and on and on and on it goes. And what all of those people have in common is they came in with grand ideas and with a lot of money. And when they left the sport, they left it with less money than they came with. And they left it in a worse position than it was when it came in. We don't want that. We've had enough of that. We've had way too much of that. No more of that. Now, I'm going to ignore the red flags of the fact that Glickman was a very short lived CEO at EuroLeague, and the reporting at the time were the clubs didn't like him. That's why he was outed. I'm going to ignore that. I'm going to ignore the fact, and forgive me, I'm going to read it. The Eurohoops editor, chief editor, and communication officer of EuroLeague head coaches board said on Twitter this week, and I quote, considering the way it ended in EuroLeague, this can be a suicidal move for British basketball. I will take it on good faith that BBF have done their due diligence, and this is not, to quote Len Bush, which did make me chuckle on Twitter, 888 coming in to buy the league. But
I like that.
how on earth do we recover from this? How can you say it's a good process when the only thing it has done is set the preferred bidder against the existing clubs? How do we recover from here? And let's say we somehow did recover. Let's say Glickman's group woos all the clubs and we have a shiny new league next year. If I'm Glickman, what faith do I have in the BBF after this? If your wife cheats on you and you take her back, what's to stopping her from cheating on you again? What
Mm.
stops the BBF in 5 years' time going, we found a shiny new toy, let's throw out the old one? I wouldn't trust them. Why would Glickman trust them after this? And finally, because even though we've got a 40-point blowout coming up, I'd rather talk about that than this shit. I rather would. Just a little friendly reminder to the basketball family that is the BBF board. I'm sure they were at 2 games at the weekend, just as I was. It's not the league you're trying to sell, and let's be clear, it's a money deal. Let's not BS everybody. It's about money.
Yeah.
Own it. I have no problem with that. I explained it to somebody yesterday, and I tried to do it in a rational way, and there was not anybody connected to any of the clubs that I was at this weekend. It was somebody different, but somebody who was long enough in the tooth to have said, oh, I went to a coaching clinic with Nick Nurse, who I'm sure Nick would have reminded you of that last week.
I'm
When
not
I
in those
when
circles.
when I explained it to her, they said it's a money grab because that's what it looks like and that's what it is. So own it. But it is not the league that you're selling. It is not the clubs you are selling. It is us, the fans. It is us, the fans, that you are trying to sell. It is the fans that every weekend spend their money. It is our eyeballs watching the TV. It is our data that you want to sell on to the next commercial partner that comes along. When you talk about the number of NBA shirts that are bought in this country, like there is some sort of correlation between that and watching basketball, which is why baseball is massive, because you can't walk down the street without seeing a New York Yankees baseball cap. That's why the British Baseball League is huge in this country, I'm sure. Without the fans, without the people who are spending their money, who are watching, who are turning up every week, none of this exists. We turn up, we watch, we buy this stuff. We are the reason it all exists, and we don't want this. We don't want this. Rant over.
I'm so proud. That was perfect. Perfect. Um, Put it in its simplest form, in the clearest form. Ultimately, the people who get lost, get hurt, or the people who get damaged, or the people who are the volunteers, or the people who've been doing this for years, or the people who have to double the amount of money they have to pay for their tickets to pay this ridiculous license fee, or but just everybody who is the beating heart of an ecosystem of the sport in this country. And unfortunately, the people, and we've talked about this years and years gone by about who selects the selectors. The reality is that the people who are in charge of these processes are not the beating heart of the sport in this country, not the professional sport, and that's what they're being asked to determine. To move it, I don't want to repeat everything I said on Wednesday because it's there for people to get. I'm not going to say it all over again. The one thing I would be really careful to assert is that, you know, I hate the concept of both sides seeing things.
Mm,
I hate the idea that, oh, plague on both their houses, why can't they just get together? It's never as simple as that. The reality is, in August of last year, there was two different directions in which the British Basketball Federation could go in relation to the league. and one was a collaborative way forward, and one was, as you say, a money grab.
Mm.
And unfortunately, there's a money grab where there is very little money. Let's
Yeah.
be clear about this.
That
There
that
is
was
so
that
many.
was the one question when I listened to Sam's interview that I thought really nailed it for me was Sam asked the question, and presumably, and credit to Sam, he's done some incredible work
Absolutely, without
over the last
without
few
talking
days
about this. Yeah, I
on
agree.
this. So for, if you haven't been, go to Hoops Fix and read everything that Sam has done because he's done great work on this. But the question that he asked directly was, where did you get the figure from for the license fee? Because it's so out of kilter with everything else in Europe. Because he checked, and the answer sounded to me like, "Oh, I'd never thought to check what other people were doing." It sounded like a number had just been come up to, and presumably this relates to how much uh, they felt somebody would be willing to pay for it, slash how much they needed to run their program over the course of the year, and it bore no relation to market value. What is Pro A? What is ACB? What is BBL? I mean, I don't know those figures, but I trust Sam has checked it out because he said he did.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and and so they had the option collaboration or basically adversarial situation,
Mm,
and they produced somehow via probably some lawyers. Um, I can't believe I can't believe this is board centered because you can't do something like this with a board of 12 people. The board are basically just waving it through. They have produced um, something which is just to anybody who's been anywhere around this sport. And unfortunately, Chris Grant hasn't. Let's be
mm,
blunt. He hasn't been around the professional sport in this country. He's never been to a BBL game in Newcastle. I'm not sure he's ever been to one anywhere else. Um, they produced some numbers which, as Millet subsequently said in his slightly wordy, and I'm not as I was going at Millet last week, so I'm not without not biased or anything, but Millet said that this would render the league uninvestable. You're
mm.
paying effectively £20 million for nothing other than the right to do and the right to run a business over
Well,
a
if
10-year
if you
period.
think about it, I can't remember what the exact figures were that uh, British Basketball League Limited owed at the end. It was in the millions. It
Yes.
was in the millions. I don't think it was in the tens of millions. I might be wrong on that. But what you're going at is I don't. I'm again not a business person, but if I had to pay 1.5 million every year, I would want my profit to be at least 15 million a
Yeah.
year, so that I'm only paying 10% out as the thing.
Well, where's it come from?
Where does it come from?
On top of that, there's no doubt a requirement to increase standards and do this, that, and the other,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
extra costs on the clubs as well. And it and it yeah, it just defies any form of description. And but that's the first thing is it defies any form of description in relation to what they did. The second thing is the manner in which it was done.
yeah. Mm,
Okay, you present somebody with a document. We've seen the documents are out there now, so we can all form our own judgments on them. But I have already, as you probably guessed.
mm,
If you send a document out there saying that if you don't abide by the terms of this tender, then we may disqualify you,
mm,
right? Well, at that point, if your position is with the clubs where, well, we can't abide by the terms of the tender, at that point, you just push it to one side. You say, we can't go through this. We're not going to spend £25,000 to send you a letter, which will then be money going out of the sport into the hands of lawyers. Not always a bad thing, but in this case, not a good thing, right? But because it won't be going anywhere else. It's
yeah, it
25
won't.
that would
No.
that's a basketball development officer somewhere.
Mm,
Can't be paid for because someone's got to fill in a form saying this is how we're going to run a league. 25 grand for that, right? And then they put a clause in it saying that we can disqualify you if you don't agree with the things that if you don't offer a pays up. So at that point, clearly there's somebody from the league has then gone back to the BBF and said, we can't, this isn't a negotiation. This is pie in the sky, Lucy in the sky with diamonds. What have you been smoking? Whatever. That's what this is. This is
mm,
just nuts. We're not, this is not good faith. This is literally unmanageable. At which point they then the BBF or I assume, as I say, this stage by stage process is not being managed by the board. It's being managed by by the higher up people in the board, probably one or two of them, right? They then come back with a lawyer's letter saying, well, actually, these terms are up for negotiation.
Mm,
Well, any contract lawyer knows that it's what's in the invitation to tender
mm,
that matters, not what some lawyer says to you afterwards. Oh, well,
mm,
if you negotiate it, well, maybe, maybe we can be quite flexible.
mm,
Well, no, if you're going to do a proper process, you need to send out an amended invitation to tender.
mm,
You need to abandon your process, start all over again, and amend it properly so it's being worked on a proper basis. Now that hasn't happened. Now this becomes more embarrassing because basically Grant goes on to Sam's podcast and basically says all these terms were up for negotiation all the time. Well, they weren't.
mm,
It's not right. So it's all right saying afterwards, after you've made the horrendous mistake of what you've done, saying, well, we'll have a chat about it if you want. At that point, if you're talking about a proper process, that's not the way you do it,
mm,
you know, because there are specific rules surrounding how the process works. At that point, you abandon it, you start again. They didn't do that. Then they dug themselves into a hole, and unfortunately, as you know, the Homer Simpson paraphrases, and this is all stuff since Wednesday, so
yeah,
that's what
yeah.
I'm talking about now. To paraphrase Homer Simpson, I know, let's dig our way out.
Mm,
That's
yeah,
basically
yeah.
what they've attempted to do. So instead of going the conciliatory role, and yet at the point you can abandon your tender, you can say, oh, this isn't working, we can go another way. They've decided, no, the best way is to keep the hammer down by we're going to find somebody who's going to offer us these numbers remarkably without even speaking to the clubs who are going to have to generate this money.
Mm,
Because Mr. Glickman isn't putting £2 million of his own money just forward for nothing. The suggestion is he's going to have a negotiation with the clubs, which means he's going to tell the clubs, you need to provide us with X% of this,
mm,
right? And the clubs are going to say, well, why should we? Who are you? Well, yeah, you've just read out the quote from the Euro hoops. I mean, that made me chuckle. I hadn't seen that. I mean, what does it say? But there's no more. And there's a couple of other investors or other people mentioned. And it doesn't take far on a Google search to decide that they're not necessarily people that come with the utmost of probity
mm,
you know. So they're the names on there. But anyway, whether he is, a saint or not, that's still not the way of doing things. So then BBF double down, triple down, quadruple down, and send out. And this is why you know that this isn't a board-led process because within 20 minutes of the SLB saying, we're putting out a press release saying we're not happy with all of this, right? BBF come back with a two-page letter.
yeah.
In that two-page letter, in a form quite wordy to a two-page letter that the chairman put out last year, which raised a few eyebrows on our podcast, if you remember,
Mm,
about other things, um, basically sought to argue the case in public,
mm,
which is just to me, to digress, 2016, I mentioned on here before, I went for an interview as I think it was performance director of
mm,
GB Basketball. It was something like that. It wasn't chairman, but something like that. And there's four people. I went down to Loughborough, had an interview, didn't get it, not a problem, fair enough. That entire interview, I was wanting to talk about the basketball and how we're going to get better and all the things we need to
mm,
do. It was all about governance.
mm.
I was asked questions about governance, collective responsibility, this, that, and the other. All of which I kind of thought was a bit of a given, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah.
But
You wouldn't be going for a post
ultimately
like
that's what
that.
it is.
Yeah,
What we're
yeah, yeah.
talking about here. And and the panel who aren't involved now, um, very pleasant, but basically all about governance. I look at now. I mean, where in the governance is it that within 20 minutes of the SL, 2 hours of the SLB putting a letter out, a two-page letter comes out directly in response, which can't have been cleared by the board.
Mm,
You're not telling me that that's been written, emailed to 12 different members who've all said, yeah, that can go out, we'll respond to that. At this point, we're in a situation where the chairman's on a frolic of his own.
mm.
That's my assumption, my assertion. No, I don't know that for sure, but that's what the evidence leads me to
Well,
believe.
I was a chair of governors at an infant school, and the idea, and we didn't have 12 people, by the way, we had about 7 or 8. The idea that within 2 hours I could get a response from all of them to something of that magnitude, uh, it just wouldn't have happened simply because the people I had on my board, we were very blessed that we had some very skilled people on the board, including somebody of a legal background, would have spent more than 2 hours considering all of the ramifications of that, assuming they picked it up immediately that I sent it to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all right if we're talking about a club warring with a fan or a
Yeah,
club.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, we're talking about a national Sport England, UK sport funded
yeah,
governing body.
yeah,
And all this, the reason I brought that stuff about governance and process
yeah,
that was went through my interview is because that just appears to have been absolutely thrown out of the window.
yeah.
Now, the email, the letter that he sent out then says, well, actually, we sent a solicitor's letter saying we could negotiate with you, so that's not right. Thinking, and it's not just that, it's lots of other stuff in there as well.
Mm,
And you're just thinking, this is just absolutely nuts.
mm,
What are you doing?
mm.
Where's your collective responsibility? Who is this coming in the name of? There's all the other things on the podcast, on the SLP podcast I mentioned. I don't want to go through it, but how it's got to that point, um, whereby they're just producing stuff on the hoof, having literally arguments in writing, in
That's the
public.
thing, isn't it? It's
It's
just
just,
all so
when all we wanted,
public.
and I go back to August of last year,
Mm.
we had a perfect opportunity to collaborate, to
Yeah,
conciliate.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. Everybody was new to it. Everybody was working for the best. Everyone was trying to get things out. And you failed to do that, not because of personality clashes. It's not because, he A hates B and B won't talk to C, right? Because we know that and I know that there are people around British basketball who get on with anybody because otherwise they wouldn't still be here,
Yeah.
right? It's because of a process that they've designed, that they've doubled down, tripled down, and quadrupled down, which have now
Mm,
left us with one individual who has managed to put forward a successful tender, which they've done detailed due diligence on. And if you believe that, we have different understanding as to what detailed due diligence is, right? They've been left with one answer, and what they've done is they've said, right, that's it. That's what that man's going to give us £2 million. That's fine by us, and stuff whatever happens. And the reality of it is that Grant's position isn't tenable from my perspective. And this is why I worry about both siding things, right?
mm,
I don't like it. I think there are times when disputes happen, they happen for a reason. But just because there are two sides to the argument doesn't mean that both sides are in the wrong. And this is what unfortunately I do for my life.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
a lawyer. I try and say, well, actually, you might say he's guilty, but he's not, or she's not guilty. This is not this he's not in the wrong. And you try and arbitrate and work out and what's going on, and you follow the evidence. And the evidence in this case is from the position we were in August, where the mood music was so good, where everything was ready to go, ready to move forward, to give stability. We've got some injection of capital. We've got all sorts of stuff. We've got owners who care. We've got clubs in venues. We've got all sorts of stuff, right? And we've got the head coach of a BBL team or SBL, SLB team is the head coach of GB. The owner is a club owner. Sorry, the director of basketball at GB is a club owner. So we've got everything in place to synergize, to get
Mm,
it right. And then you end up with a situation where, at the end of the day, Chris Grant's idea in getting rid of 777 wasn't to do all of that. His idea was to put into place a process whereby they could basically tax the clubs, leech off the clubs, which means leeching off the public, leeching off the fans, taking away from the resources that the clubs have to run the junior programs, which are by far the bigger juniors programs in the UK.
mm,
Take everything away so they can then have power to spend that money as they wish. And in the meantime, by the way, we need to host a game next month at the last minute. Could you do it? Because we couldn't get a venue in London again
mm,
to Newcastle. You know, just just incredible. Just incredible. And if you disagree with the strategy, if you agree with the strategy, disagree with the strategy, fine. Um, if you don't like the way he's done it, or you don't agree with what he's done it, fine. Everybody has disagreements. But the lack of governance, the lack of process that's been adopted, that's kind of played its way out over the last week with what's gone on. The interview, which has been done on a day's, effectively on a day's notice with Sam. Oh yeah, I'll come and I'll talk about it. What are you going to say? Nothing. That is that all cleared with the people at JB Basketball, British Basketball Federation, whose names are being pushed through the mud in relation to this.
mm,
Whereas what's Kieran's position on this? Kieran's an ambassador for JB Basketball. He's not on the board. He doesn't have a say to it. Has anybody run this past him? Is
mm,
anybody using any degree of experience? Dan Clark. Dan's on the other side of the argument, but he's a performance director. what is he doing? And that's why I say I don't, was after I was pretty unimpressed 2 weeks ago when you've got the SLB coming out and talking about its rule changes via individual tweets of the chairman and an interview with the Yorkshire Evening Post.
Mm,
That was pretty awful and disappointing in the way that it was carried out and demonstrated a lack of a proper process. This is 1,000 times worse because this is a sport in this country, not some idiot like me whinging on a podcast about a few import changes.
mm, mm,
You know, this is and it does jeopardize things. Where do we go from now? We've done the whinging enough. I've said what I say. I don't think his position is tenable. I think he's dug himself a hole so deep that there's just no way out of it. I don't think the clubs are going to budge from what I can see. I don't think they're going to budge in relation to, oh, come on, Marshall, tell us what your idea is.
mm,
I don't think they're interested in giving away the investability of their business or indeed the control of their business to somebody with as shaky a recent background as his, and
mm,
with the comments that he said. And I don't think they should. I certainly don't think it's appropriate for the professional clubs to be funding the national federation.
no.
Doesn't happen at
And
rugby. Doesn't happen
the worry is
that they expect that. I think is quite is
yeah, 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 yeah. I
concerning.
mean, that is as you said. I think you've said it on here before. You definitely said it on the SLB. Is the opposite of everything else that we see in this country. The RFU funds the clubs. The ECB funds the clubs. That's how it works. The money trickles down, not up, in that regard. But the worry is, okay, that the other alternative is the clubs stand their ground, and SLB goes off on its own, and the preferred bidder go ahead, and what happens if they manage to just make up teams in Coventry and Leeds and wherever wherever all the, I mean it would be an amazing achievement. We would have to applaud them for the achievement to create 12 teams in the blink of an eye. That is sort of 9 months from 7 months from now, sort of thing, and you end up with two leagues. What happens then? Because does FIBA do what it did to Japan 10 years ago and kick Great Britain out of competition? Is that what we're trying to get to? Are we trying to get our men and our women are trying to qualify and we're going to get them kicked out because of this? Is that what we're trying
Yeah, I
to
mean
do?
that, yeah, and if you look to the furthest point, which is always a very important thing to do when you're putting anything together, where do we want to get to and how are we going to get there? And technically, that is the furthest point. Now, realistically, and I can come back here in October if you want, but if there's another league running in October, my bowler hat over there will be halfway down my throat,
Mm,
right? Because I know how much work it takes to sustain one with 35 years of stuff going on, as do you.
mm,
Which again, it kind of calls into question Grant's judgment because he doesn't, this is like, David Davis and Brexit, we hold all the cards, they'll be on the phone to us for a trade deal the day after we
mm.
leave. No, you don't. The clubs have the customer base, the clubs have the loyalty, the clubs have the income, the clubs have the youth programs, the clubs have the venues. The fact that you would think that you had this kind of position of overwhelming power, um,
Because
whereby
that's the other
it's just an incredible
yeah.
misjudgment.
It's the other frustration about it is Mattioli Arena, Cannon Medical Arena, Virtue Motors Arena, Play Sport. The Bristol thing is
Yeah,
not is closer now than it's been at any point. These have been built, literally built by the clubs. And what are they being used for? They're being used to bring the next generation on. There are kids playing basketball in this. This is the development that we've been craving for years and years and years. I've always said if you build it, they will come. The problem with this sport has always been we didn't have facilities, and now we're having facilities, and so your alternative league will be to distance itself from the facilities that we've battled for 30, 40, 50 years.
yeah, facilities that GB and British Basketball Federation's been happy to use for international games, including
Mm,
Newcastle and Leicester.
mm,
You know, um,
yeah.
but even then, it's kind of a wider question because the Basketball England's involvement. I don't know about Basketball Scotland, but Basketball England's involvement with the built-up venues is negligible. They don't. They don't see it as it's almost from my position a question of jealousy as opposed to the fact that, oh, look what these private organisations have got and we haven't.
Mm,
We don't have the Aspire at the Virtue Motors Arena anymore. The You don't see people from the national governing body looking at best practice of the clubs that have managed to do this. You just
mm.
don't. There's such a us and them mentality. That might have built up over years and years and years, but it's kind of
And
perpetuated.
yet, and
It
yet,
all comes down to where the money
and
comes from.
and
You know what I
yet,
mean?
and yet, Leicester built it first. Kevin spoke
Yeah,
to Paul all
yeah,
the way through the process. Kevin spoke to Yuri. Paul will have spoke to Yuri and Sarah in Sheffield. They would have shared their
yeah,
common learning through it to ensure that that the next venue was built and the next venue was built and the next venue was built.
yeah, absolutely. And that's why you see if you have people who've been doing this for 30 years and they couldn't survive on their own, it's easy to look from outside and think, oh, Manchester City hate Manchester United and Manchester United hate Liverpool. With the degree of money they have, yes, of course. And these people are all in competition, just like Newcastle are in competition with Sheffield, and Sheffield are in competition with Leicester, and Leicester and everybody's in competition with each other. Of course they are. But they're not in competition in relation to their businesses because
Mm,
the only way the businesses grow and things get better is if the pot grows.
mm,
And in order to do that, you have to share the knowledge and share the
mm,
information.
mm,
Now, that's something, unfortunately, that the governing bodies and the BBF in this case, but also Basketball England, have not got their heads around. They just haven't. And I'll argue that point to anybody who wants to come back at me about it. There is nowhere near enough collaboration in the sport within this country. And the failings, but the fact to see it so outwardly on paper in
mm.
this case to see the
Yeah,
level of
yeah,
the level of disagreement and almost hostility. And as I say,
yeah.
you have to two sides. Ultimately, what we've heard about everything, this was a process at the behest of the governing body, and the governing body set it up. The governing body set up a flawed process. They've got to a flawed result, and they've doubled down, tripled down, and they've now made their the position almost unnegotiable. I mean, the suggestion that, 20 minutes after the SRB clubs, or half an hour, 2 hours after the SRB clubs come out and say, look, we don't consider this to be appropriate process. The suggestion that Grant then sends out a message which basically says it's now up to the clubs to individually negotiate with Lickman.
Mm,
And it's like, well, you're just trying to divide and conquer. I
mm.
mean, it's so blatantly obvious what you're trying to do. That's not a good faith way to do business.
No.
It's not a good faith way to develop the sport. And so, yeah, I'm afraid we've got to the point whereby I'm afraid it's power trip time. And I'm afraid, no, for me, Chris Grant's done. I
Mm,
just don't think his position is tenable. We'll see where it goes. Well, obviously, who picks the pickers? Who decides whether his position is tenable or not? Well, I suppose the board. The board have shown a commendable lack of curiosity in the process so far. If what they've put through was unilaterally supported by them,
mm,
I'll be honest. If
mm,
that's unanimously supported by them, beg your pardon. That, but then again, you go onto the board and no one on that board's ever ran a professional club.
mm,
No one. And there's 12 of them. So somewhere along the line, somebody has to grow a pair. Somebody has to go within the Basketball Federation, within the DCMS, wherever, and someone has to say, what the heck is going on here? And they have to
yeah,
interrogate back to the beginning
yeah.
and not where we're at now. And they have to look at the process. And if the process has failed, and I spent 45 minutes talking about governance in an interview 10 years ago, which I did not want to talk about governance, right? And if they haven't, if now that is now, oh, well, just do it whichever way you want, off you go, find as much money as you can. Well, that just goes to show what a mess we are in. Um, yeah, there we go. Watch this space, Dan.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Watch this space. Hopefully, we won't have to talk too much about it because uh, it just drives me nuts. Can
Yeah.
we talk? Can we talk about 40-point blowouts instead?
Yeah, still about 40-point blowout. Yeah, come on, crack on.
Friday night then, Leicester Riders 94, Bristol Flies 59. I don't think we'll be talking long about this, to be
35
fair.
points, but we'll get there. Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll get
yeah.
there.
It was 40 at one stage.
Yeah.
Keedy Johnson, because I was looking up the records, and I was talking about Rowe and his 4 minutes that he played in the biggest ever Leicester win over Bristol. Keedy Johnson off the bench.
Were they the last 4 minutes when
Well, I did.
you
I couldn't check that, but I'm guessing they
uh,
probably were.
garbage time rule? Is that what you're going to call
Yeah,
it now?
yeah,
Okay.
basically. When Leicester scored the first 9 points of the game, and Andreas had nearly called two timeouts in about the first 5 minutes, you kind of knew it was going to be a long night for the Flyers.
Yeah, it was kind of weird. Obviously, they disappeared off to Estonia at the weekend on Tuesday, and they got a win there. I think it was Estonia, maybe in Latvia. I can't
It
remember.
was Estonia without
Estonia.
Keedy as well. Keedy didn't
Without
play that
Keely,
game.
yeah, who obviously maybe he was hampered a little bit in the final. If he's not playing on the Tuesday, and he wasn't certainly as impactful in the final as you would have expected. Bit perplexed to see him on the bench. Either he's a potential league MVP, either he's healthy and he plays, or he's particularly when you're trying to get up to a good start, or he's not healthy and you sit him out. I couldn't get my head. And Bristol have had a lot of different. They're still fishing for the starting lineup
Mm,
because McCormack was out this time and Walsh is in, Johnson's out, Louis starting the game. So there really are quite a lot of moving parts. But that said, I thought the first 3.5 minutes they played the best 9-0 loss I've ever seen.
yeah, yeah. To be fair,
I'm
yeah,
not
yeah.
going to turn around and say that,
Their
people
defense
get
was really good
hidden.
to be 9-0 down.
Yeah, people get hidden by the score,
Yeah,
but I was
yeah,
looking, I
yeah.
was expecting you saying, well, hang on, this team has struggled against Leicester in this gym twice. They've just coming off a massive final. They're tired they will be tired from the trip there back. What they're going to bring, and they brought it.
Mm,
Um, there are some teams, however, that aren't good matchups for other teams. I've talked
mm,
about this, before. And I think we're getting into the category where Bristol are not a good matchup for Leicester because um, they struggle to score the ball.
mm.
For all their defense and Kendall Lewis the last week, I watched all those
To be
games.
fair, they missed some absolute
Kendall,
chippies around the ring. That so
Yeah,
don't
but a
think
chippy's
Leicester.
not a chippy when
Yeah.
Thompson's there,
Well, I
Dan. That's the
guess
thing. You see
maybe.
what I mean? This is the thing about matchups, okay? Lewis, who's been last three games, has been absolutely outstanding. Really making a jump,
Mm,
even in the final. He was a one who showed a bit of will. But he's all over the court to start with. They are playing with quickness and aggression, and they just couldn't put the ball in the
physicality as
basket.
well. Yeah,
And
physicality as well
physicality
defensively.
as well,
Yeah,
and you
yeah,
thought this
yeah,
is a good team, and they just
yeah,
couldn't put
yeah.
the ball in the basket. And fortunately, you give up a couple. You don't finish at the rim. That's when you get transition
Mm,
against you. And what Leicester are is we've talked about it before. They're utterly consistent in what they
mm,
do,
mm.
and they challenge enough shots and don't give up anything easy and don't put you on the foul line. So what you need, I think, to be successful against them is you need outstanding individual performances. You need people to take over a game. And at London, I thought Ovi took over the game. And uh, when they played Newcastle, Okoro took over the game on night, made some shots, individual shots. Bristol, without Keedy, don't really have that. They need to play at pace and um, they need to Sheffield to be having one of his shot making games.
Mm,
But ultimately, Evan Walsh is scoring on basically everybody in the league. It's a different thing, getting past the first man at Leicester because there's a second man there.
mm,
So he makes the same drives, but he's not getting fouled and he's not able to finish because you've got a game-changing shot blocker there.
mm.
And the same around the rim with Robinson. Robinson's it's hard. He can't get his little posts up that he can get against Cheshire the way
Mm,
he can get them against Leicester. So they really need Keedy to go off for 35 to beat Leicester. That's the bluntest point I can say. That's the bluntest
yeah,
point I
yeah,
can
yeah,
say.
yeah, yeah.
You know,
Did he not have 35 in the game that went to overtime in the trophy down in Bristol as
he
well?
might have, he might have,
He
but
did.
they need a guy who's literally going to look up the guy. They can, it is to the point of you have to pick on the guys who aren't as good as defenders and keep the other
Mm,
guys out of the way.
yeah, yeah.
And if you're successful, if you which leads to a lot of one-on-one basketball, which Bristol aren't really about.
No.
They're not a one-on-one team. They're a ball moving team. So they just kind of they got just. I felt sorry for them a little bit
Mm,
in the first half. I thought they played hard and they played aggressively. The ball wouldn't drop, And I didn't watch the second half. I texted you, said, "Do I have to?" Because I was jet
Yeah,
lagged.
yeah, yeah. So let's
Um,
before we won't talk about the second half, but
okay.
the other thing I wanted to pick up from the first half is Leicester got in a small amount of foul trouble, just guys on two, which kind of messed their rotations a little bit. But Brooks came in, hit a couple of threes.
He did.
Shelton
That's
played
right.
well. The bench unit was stretching the lead, and we've sort of talked endlessly about Leicester's bench unit. They were good in this game.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, that's absolutely right. And you know, and Brooks, to be fair, it's not easy when you're in America and you come in and you're playing 6 minutes.
Mm, mm,
You know, he's knocked down a couple of shots now. He knocked down a couple of shots in a couple of other games, and that's all they're expecting of him. That's
mm,
fine, but it still doesn't. You know, it's not easy. Shelton, the criticism has always been more about the temperament than the actual production.
yeah,
You know, he does. You know, he's a very up and down guy. Gives you highs, gives you lows.
mm,
In this game, um, he was too much for the bench group of Leicester, particularly Smith and McCormack. You know, just
mm,
too much energy there. And you know, as I say, if you played one game in 14 days as opposed to um, 4 games in seven, you know,
mm,
that is kind of going to hit you. It's often going to hit you more with the guys coming off the bench who are not necessarily physically tired, but maybe, you know, mentally not quite where they need to be. So yeah, I mean, Leicester did what they had to do and did it well. The one thing I like, the reason I like Leicester this year more than at this point Sheffield is because Leicester kind of have that ability to win by 30 and give up 60.
mm.
You know, and as opposed to winning by 15 and giving up 85, you know,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
you're winning right, you know, because they have that consistency of play. Um, but yeah, this game was a little bit more about Bristol, to be fair.
Mm,
Yeah, Leicester the thing with Leicester is you're gonna have to be a good team to beat them and you're gonna have to play well.
mm.
Whereas everybody else, I think, can lose to anybody, basically. I'm not sure Leicester can. That's my subject to being healthy,
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Only question in the second half was whether Leicester would get their biggest ever win against Bristol, but as I mentioned, they fell just short. So,
Oh, yeah, blown call of the week as well. Did you? I don't know if you saw it in the first half. He didn't talk about it in the commentary. Abercrombie went on the baseline and did a spin move and threw it back to Thompson for I think Thompson or Jackson for a layup. In doing so, he planted his right foot firmly on the baseline, about two
yeah.
feet from the referee who was standing watching it, who didn't see it.
I,
Um,
I didn't see it, but our producer did because I heard
and
him
we
go,
repeated
"Oh,
it.
he
Yeah,
stood on the baseline. He's got
yeah,
bright whatever color shoes on, and the referee missed it." I did hear. Shout out
yeah.
to
He's quite bloody right. He did. It was a
yeah,
horrible. That frustrates me.
mm,
That's technically what are you looking at? You know, it's right in
yeah,
front of you.
yeah. Jackson, 20 points and 6 rebounds. Shelton, 15 points and 13 rebounds. Johnson, 14 points and 5 assists. Tuther Johnson, 17 points. Walsh, 13 points. They were 31% field goal shooting. Newcastle Eagles 80, London Lions 91. No Ward Hibbert had to Begovic either for London. Dallaire was into the starters. Another game with an early time out in it. Mark called one inside 3 minutes, but London very active defensively, I thought, and led 14-3 midway through the first quarter.
I think London were active defensively, but I thought it showed up in comparison with Newcastle's inaction
Mm,
defensively.
mm,
Um, you know, the background to this game kind of tells you where the both teams were at. London lost in Newcastle 2 weeks ago
mm.
and didn't play very well, to be fair, on that day. Um, Newcastle playing the game after winning the final, which was, I don't know what our record was, but it
I,
wasn't great. Uh,
I'm not a betting man, but if I had been, I would have put all my money on London in this
yeah,
game because
absolutely.
Newcastle
And
have
then
spent the week celebrating, going on Tyne Tees TV, doing this, doing
exactly,
that, and
it's
London
just
have been sitting there remembering that game from 2 weeks ago.
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And again, so, you know, so maybe London have a bit of rust, but I don't think it kind of worked that way.
Mm.
And on top of that, when you throw in Ward Hibbert, who's actually probably the one guy who wouldn't fall for any of that
Yeah,
stuff
yeah, yeah,
in relation to he's not in America, he's been around, he's the
yeah,
energizer, he doesn't
yeah.
care about scoring
He's
and all
playing
that
his old team.
playing his old team, all of that stuff. You did think like that. But that said, Newcastle's defense at the beginning of the game was pretty abominable. And Ovi basically took the game and said, right, I'm best player on the court. I'm going to get whatever I want. London scored at the rim repeatedly without challenge. And that you just can't give that up because London are not a great 3-point shooting team. and that they were giving up. There were miscommunications. There was no help side at times, and that's why he called the early timeout.
Mm.
You know, no
There
question.
was a second time out in the first quarter, but it didn't actually appear on live stats. So I couldn't work out if that was Mark calling a second timeout in the quarter because it felt like Božič wouldn't call a timeout at
I
that
don't know.
point.
I wasn't there.
Well, I know, I know, and
Yeah,
obviously Candy came into the game
yeah.
early as well, which is another sign that things are not quite
It is
working as they
also
would like.
they got plenty of minutes to with
Yeah,
what
yeah, yeah,
lost
yeah,
30 minutes. So,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, Candy's got coming off a bit of a height and they finally made a couple of shots. He can't shoot the ball, you know,
Mm,
so and he gave him 2.5, 3 minutes of, you know, a decent, you know, perfectly acceptable basketball, but it indicated things weren't quite right. But I like London's and I thought London's intensity in this game was good, and I thought Bozic's game plan was right because um, you know, the reason that you know they focused down on Okoro one night,
mm,
and they didn't just focus down the Okoro night with defending with one guy. There was a second. They were physical with them quite
mm,
legitimately, but there was also you know they were shading a second guy towards them as well, making him giving him tough looks. Now what that meant was that James was able to get off because he was the one who had the mentality to score. He's kind of the fourth guy, isn't he? You know, there's
mm.
Victoria Knight, Alan Aikens, and James is the one people tend to forget about. But he's coming into his own now. He's a late picker. He was picked up late. You can see he's getting more comfortable. So this was his turn because they
Yeah,
weren't
yeah,
quite ready for him. They were ready for a Caro. They were ready for Knight because the game 2 weeks ago was all about those guys making plays basically one on one at the end of the
yeah,
game. So they clearly tweaked their game plan. They were clearly ready for that and just played with more force. They
yeah.
played with more force from what I could see. The entire, you know, and um, there were too many of Newcastle's guys who just for whatever reason weren't able to be impactful. They got nothing out of the four spot from Long and Alan Aikens,
Mm.
and minimal out of the five spot as well. But you can't give up as many layups and dunks as they gave up
So
early.
so James shooting the lights out got the scores level mid second quarter 37-37. Newcastle didn't make a field goal between 3:22 in the second quarter and 3:12 in the third quarter, during which time London pushed it out to 48-60 and Newcastle never really recovered
That
from
isn't,
that.
you know, well, actually, I thought Newcastle's defense improved in the second half, and I thought it became a bit more of a kind of a grinded out game. What I will say in the second half is I thought the refs lost the plot because there was a lot of fouls called in the second half.
Mm,
Um, I mean, there was Peterson got Peterson actually did commit a foul on the jump shot from Makara, but he got kind of technicaled out on what looked
yeah,
like
yeah.
he was
That was
dissent.
there was the best moment though because he got a technical. He sat down. He just fouled out. And I clipped it up and put it out on Twitter, but you're obviously not on Twitter
Yeah,
either, Dave.
pretty.
As it cuts to him on the bench, Lasker goes, "I wonder what's running through his mind," and Peterson mouths, "What the was that?" And I thought we don't need to wonder what's running through his mind.
Neither
That's
man,
for
yeah.
sure.
I mean, to be fair, Flood's actually playing better than Peterson at the moment, so it didn't hurt them tremendously, but it got bittier from there, and you know that you had
My
technical.
favorite call of the whole game, by the way, was in the fourth quarter, where Pulham fouled out, and it was the two twins,
Twins.
Simon and Paul. One called a block, one called a charge, and you thought, here we go. How did that? Aren't twins
Well,
supposed to have?
I mean, that
Are
was
they not supposed to have
whichever
connecting
one called
claws or something?
the charge was right because you know where in the world that was a block.
Mm,
Um, but even then, at the other end, you had again one of the twins called a technical on London for someone standing up on the bench when the game was playing. They should have been watching the court,
mm,
and literally, yeah, I think it was Sandy or Adebayo stands up on the bench for a second, which made me feel a little bit more sympathetic for those Surrey players all those weeks ago who didn't stand up. And I'm
yeah.
thinking, at that point, then you had it just you know, Alan Aikens mugging Soko at the rim and not getting a call and Bozic getting wound up about that. It didn't impact the way the game was played or who was going to win the game because London had more intensity. But I would struggle to believe that if they watched that back, they'd be content with kind of the level of fussiness that went on.
Mm.
I know it may have been getting a little bit physical, but I didn't see much consistency there. There was one right in front of the camera where London threw the ball out of bounds and got the ball on the baseline.
Mm.
I just thought, well, I thought, and there was even the normally fair-minded Newcastle fans who I never criticise the refs.
You weren't there to criticise them,
I wasn't
Dave.
there criticizing, but no, anyway. But yeah, I thought London played really well. I thought Newcastle were average, and yeah, and I didn't think the rest were great in the second half either for either team.
So James 32, 11 of 17 shooting, Okoro 14, Spencer and Knight both had 10. Brisker 19, Soko 15, Rye 14.7 rebounds and 6 assists. Sheffield Sharks 83, Manchester Basketball 75. McGill into the starters for Sheffield. Mitchell was back. Delpesh and Lewis were not. Not a lot in the way of scoring in the first quarter. 11-7 after 8 minutes and 30 seconds.
Yeah, well, yeah, just a bit weird, wasn't it? Because they were
Mm.
playing at a decent pace and they were
Yeah,
getting
yeah.
decent shots, and both teams are probably better offensive teams than defensive teams. I
Mm,
would say they have played each other a bit, but I still don't see that much in the way of kind of defensive game planning, particularly from Manchester. So I was, a bit surprised that the teams couldn't score
mm,
early. Um, it became a game whereby Sheffield were always comfortable and Manchester were always chasing.
mm,
Um, Manchester starting Irving, and I'm not sure he's a five. I mean, I think he plays a five okay. Um, but he's kind of it's kind of the only space they've got any minutes because without Del Pesh they've got minutes. They don't want to start Effigy. They've got to start somebody. So they're starting Irving, and he's ended up being the five, and they haven't really got the minutes at the wing and the guard because they're full of wings and guards.
mm,
The other thing about this was Maddox was playing again,
mm,
and DeBose, who played very well last week as a point guard, effectively as a point guard, I think he was limited to about 12 or 13 minutes in this
mm,
game. So he never, I'm not sure he's that type of player. My impression of watching him, more I watch him, is that he's not your instant impact type of player. He's the type of guy who needs to be in the rhythm of the game.
mm,
He needs to get his 25 or 30 minutes. He's not Nick Lewis who's just going to come in and,
mm,
and go, he'd go from 0 to 100.
mm.
So I thought, that hurt them as well. And it's that situation where you have an excess of players, it hurts you.
Mm.
You have more
Yeah.
players than you can fit in. Um, so yeah, it kind of went very slowly to
Yeah.
start.
And then Groves made some shots. Sheffield got out to a 7 point lead. They sort of stayed there for much of the second quarter. Sheffield had the last 9 points of the half, including a clay dunk just before halftime, then a really careless turnover by Manchester and a Groves three in the corner on the buzzer as a result. And it was a 15-point game. And you just sort of think you can't make that mistake at the end
You
of
know,
it.
they are a frustrating team, but they do remind me a little bit of Newcastle last year. They're a frustrating team to watch insofar as they don't help themselves.
Mm.
I don't, and they're talented enough to be in all the games again,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
the thing
yeah.
last year. They're talented enough to be on all the games, but you've got, there's only 9 teams, and only at this point in time would you say is Caledonia not got it together for
Mm,
various different reasons. So unless you're playing Caledonia, you're going to have it together to win a game in this league.
mm,
And I didn't like the way they guarded Nixon. I thought, I didn't see much in the way of adherence to a scouting report. Nixon got going with his, we know he likes to go left. We know he likes to drive and pull up and shoot that left off that left-hand dribble or get to the rim going to his left. I didn't think they appreciated that at all. I think they have to start Effigy. I just can't see, and just get out of what they can. I think it's a bit of a bailout to bring him off the bench because you're worried about foul trouble. I just think he has to, if he's your centre, he's your defensive minded centre, he have to set the tone,
mm,
and they have to work with that. Um, Sheffield fits and starts,
mm,
but solid is probably the best way of describing him. Clay is really impressive.
mm,
He really able to hold down the middle kind of on his own. The rest of them have got a rotating cast of kind of wings and guards,
mm,
but without Chapman now, you really got to focus in on Nixon. I think
mm.
Nixon's a real kind of centerpiece of that team now.
Manchester cut it to 6 at the start of the second half. Kind of hung around. Did you see the block by Mitchell on Groves
I
with
did,
five
yeah. I
minutes
mean,
to play? What a block that is!
Mitchell is a multi-talented player. I mean, he was. They won at Newcastle earlier in the season, in the end of the trophy in the meaningless game, and he was exceptional. Actually, as he walked, I was walking up the stairs. He was walking up the stairs, They actually said great job to him. That's the only player this season I've said great game to. Maybe I'm trying to recruit him. Who knows? But no, actually, but because I thought that was a game that Moore did all the ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but Mitchell, I thought Mitchell was just outstanding in that game, and it wasn't just the fact that he catches it and he can shoot the ball from anywhere. It was everything else. His poise and he has a little bit of size and athleticism defensively as well.
Mm,
So that was a centre's block from what
yeah,
he is a centre forward, and it was a great block. And I'm going to give credit to a ref though for
yeah,
not doing something.
yeah, yeah.
Because normally
They
you see
both landed hard and all of that, but it
both see
was,
bodies flying
yeah,
around and it's an immediate whistle and everybody goes
yeah,
what? And so it wasn't. So
yeah,
that's absolute credit to a no call. But yeah, he just went upstairs, didn't he? It
yeah,
was a
yeah.
great play.
It was unbelievable. There's one I don't know. They must put it out on social media. There's a great angle of it. I think from the opposite baseline.
Hmm.
It was a 4 point game with a couple of minutes to go. Manchester missed a couple of chippies. The next thing you know, Sharks were up 10. But it always felt like they were
Yeah,
gonna.
basically, I mean, there was a play in I think where Mitchell had a three from the corner, which they worked well in the probably beginning of the fourth quarter, which they tied it at 62 and he missed it.
Mm,
And then they got to within four and then FJ missed a couple of layups, a
mm,
couple at the rim. And as when you miss shots at the rim, you're generally playing 5-on-4 the other way. And
yeah.
Sheffield were able to kind of come off that. I thought um, they've got an issue. They've got to decide what they want to do with Ashton Langford. Is he going to be the point guard or is he going to be a scoring guard? Because he can be both.
Mm,
They've got to kind of balance their back court out with it being Madut and Dubose and even Cody John as well, because John's coming in and shooting the ball a lot as
mm,
well. So there's only so many shots to go around, but I'm still probably of the view that Ashton Langford may be their most efficient scorer in
mm,
the backcourt.
yeah.
And so if he's setting things up, that becomes a bit of a problem. And there's a difference between who he's playing with. But yeah, more than anything, you're yet to see with I'm talking about Manchester a lot, but you're yet to see with Manchester kind of that winning play at that winning time.
Mm,
Make that shot, make that layup, make that dunk. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
That kind of change of momentum play. Who's it going to be? You don't know who it's going to be. It probably should be Ashton Langford, but you don't quite know yet. With Sheffield, you know it's going to be Nixon,
mm,
and then McGill's going to be going to fit in eventually, but
mm,
primarily it's going to be Nixon with the basketball, and then they're going to move the ball and they're going to get the shots that they want. The team has got a lot of depth to kind of figure out who he wants in the game at the end. It's basically Nixon, Clay, and three others at the moment,
mm,
you know, and you know they are not playing a 40-minute game,
mm.
but they're playing well enough in the minutes that they play well in to
Yeah,
win.
yeah, 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 yeah. Nixon 18, Clay 18 and 12 rebounds. McGill 17.6 assists. Groves 17. Ashton Langford 18, KO 16, and John 13. Uh, we're still on Friday, aren't we? Yes, we are.
Yeah,
We've got it. We've done it. Surrey 89 is 89.
yes,
There we go. They
89.
lost though.
Ah,
Cheshire Phoenix 99. Um, it's not quite as exciting when you lose.
no.
Atwood and Holden back for Cheshire. Surrey led by 6 uh, early on, but from 21-20, just before the end of the first quarter, Cheshire scored 16 consecutive points to lead 21-36.
Yeah, it is kind of. They're not built for scoring races, sorry, I don't think. They're too systematic. And we've talked about it before, they need particularly, Ray to be impactful virtually every game he plays. Um, the issue, I watched this game back, it was the first game I watched back. Unfortunately, I knew the score and I don't watch the games as carefully when I know the score, which kind of
Mm,
frustrates me at times. Um, but Cheshire were Cheshire, Ben's got basically 8 or 9 players, and it doesn't really matter who's in the game. It seems they're going to be the same, and so
mm,
he knocks around with them. But they have some talented individual scorers, we know that, and Austin is playing out of his skin at the moment. Well, Surrey are moving the basketball. They look great. When the ball kind of sticks or when they don't finish properly, it's a struggle. I don't know if Surrey have scored 100 in the game this year. I don't think they have,
I
and that's
can't remember them doing
They
that.
beat London with 95 at the Copper
Mm,
Box. I don't think they've scored more than that. Maybe against Caledonia they have. I don't know. I don't think so. Because they have little droughts and there are times when their bench unit struggles to produce. And that's a problem against Cheshire, probably more than anybody else,
mm,
because Cheshire are going to keep scoring and they're going to keep going relentlessly. And that 16-0 run was the game,
mm,
in reality, because whilst you can score on Cheshire, it's very difficult to stop them enough to get a 16-0 run unless you're playing at Ellesmere Port a
mm,
couple of days later.
mm. Yeah, 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 yeah,
I mean, he says, realizing he's saying something
yeah,
nonsensical at the
yeah,
time
yeah,
he's
yeah,
actually saying
yeah.
it. Sorry, but no, I mean, it's rare you're going to get that. And I just thought, um,
The other thing is, Surrey responded with a 15-4 run. They cut it to three, but there was a lot of free throws, particularly in the second quarter, and Cheshire actually missed 11 free throws in the first half. So they could have been much further ahead than they
yeah,
were. They're
and
not a great free throw shooting team, but that was even below their.
they're gonna come at you. That's the thing, and it's this idea. It's how do you stop them from coming at you? Well, all you can do is play great individual defense because you have to assume when you're playing Cheshire that the guy with the ball in his hand is going to be the guy who's shooting it,
Mm,
right? Unless it's holding, in which case you got to stay at home or
mm,
get on the shooters, right? But everybody else is primarily Scott Grace and Austin. They're looking to create for themselves first and foremost. Um, so that's the first thing, and then you've got to keep scoring, because their defense isn't great, Cheshire's, and they give you opportunity to score. But if you have people, um, particularly guys who aren't in a rhythm who miss a few shots in a row, then yeah, 10-0 run, 12-0 run happens. And they're tough to guard without fouling, particularly for a team like Cheshire because they're quite athletic. A team like Surrey because they're quite athletic. So Holden's a tough matchup for the Surrey guards.
mm,
Who's going to guard Holden? Because what they'll just they throw him down the post, use his size, the offensive rebounds. It's a real matchup difficulty for Surrey, Cheshire, I think.
mm.
And then I say Holden, but then you've got some of the other guys as well. Atwood down in the post. Obviously, White shooting his threes and all of that stuff, and then Scott Grayson, who was sneakily
Although
become.
they were quite happy with White shooting threes in this one because he
Yeah,
took
and he was
one of
one of 10 and they shot and they scored 99.
He was he
And I
was
mean,
2 of 12. He made one right at the end. He was one of
well,
11, and the last one went in.
but
Let's
here's
just
the
go
thing,
through the
right?
last
Sorry,
three. We'll just go through the last few plays because it was actually close, even though it ended up being a 10-point game.
it was, yeah.
100 seconds to go. It's a 3-point game. Sorry, get the stop. They're down three. Ray a little out of control down the lane, turns it over. Timeout. Austin then attacks the rim. He's fouled. One of two from the threes, from the free throw line, 86-90. Adelican with a turnover, Holden stealing a pass. Timberlake, 37 seconds to go. I thought this was probably the backbreaker.
Mhm.
Almost lost the ball and then somehow broke out of the double team and dunked it 86-92.
Yeah, you never, it's basic. The 101 is basketball when you don't let anybody split the trap. If you're
Mm,
trapping, you cannot let them
mm,
split you through the middle. You have to have your feet literally joint. You can't let them out because as soon as you let them through the middle, you don't have to force them backwards. And he did manage to break it, and that was the game. I thought, also, Adelican's been impactful because there isn't that many anybody to guard him down there.
mm,
But that possession that he threw the ball away, a little bit tentative, and he caught the ball probably 15 feet from the basket as opposed to 10 or 8. So he was looking to pass as opposed to score. And he's a passer off the rule. When he sits the screen, he gets the ball in the middle, he passes out to the corner. He's not really a great passer out the post. He's a post scorer. And that took him away from what he was doing. And Cheshire, because they shoot the ball so much, because they go up and down so much, one thing you can say about those guys is they have confidence at the end of games.
mm, Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They have confidence. They have confidence to go and make whatever play they need to make. Whereas Surrey a little bit more, a little bit more team orientated, a little bit more hesitation.
Mm,
As whose shot is it, whose turn is it? You know what I mean? And I thought, yeah, and we're getting to the point with Cheshire now whereby that's probably 4 or 5 very close games that they've won, and that is a
mm.
close game if it's 3 points with it.
They've had a 10-0 run in the last minute to win the
Yeah.
game.
And well, yeah, and they had a 7-0 against Caledonia again to overtime. They had a
Mm,
5 or 7-0 against Newcastle to win
mm,
with Timberlake shot on the buzzer. They nearly beat Cheshire when they were down by 20 with Sheffield when they were down by 20 with a minute to go,
mm,
with a quarter to go, and down by 10 with a minute to go.
mm,
So, you got to respect the fact that they're going to play till the end,
mm,
and they can put up points very, very quickly, and they're not scared.
Yeah.
And that carried them in this game. I mean, Cheshire are 9 and 8 and 7. They could easily be 5 and 9, but
Mm,
they've finished games off the way that they're meant to.
mm. James, 18 points and 6 assists. To Delican, 8 of 11 for 16 points and 10 rebounds. Gooden, 14 points and 6 assists. Scott Grayson had 22 points and 6 rebounds. Austin had 20 points. That's a combined 16 of 24 shooting off the bench between those two. Timberlake, 18.
And the bench was
17,
in.
hey,
Go on,
sorry.
sorry.
17 of
The-
32 from the free throw line.
Yeah, and the bench was in during the 16-0 run, of course. And Scott Grayson is quietly becoming one of the best individual scorers in the league.
Mm, mm,
He's really comfortable getting to his mid-range in particular. He doesn't shoot as many threes as the rest of them, but he's like a mini kind of Holden with the basketball, and then they give the ball to him, and he knows now that his role is to come in and score,
mm.
and he's got that little kind of getting to his spot, rising up and shooting the ball. So he's really developed as the season's gone on.
On to Sunday. Manchester basketball 85, Newcastle Eagles 89. No Madut, so DeBose was into the
Yeah.
starting lineup. Another early timeout in this game. Mark had to call one when they were 12-2 down after 3.5 minutes, Newcastle.
Yeah, well, you expect Manchester to come out in this game because I think they're probably coming off 2 or 3 losses, probably
Mm,
3 or 4, maybe 3 or 4 losses in a row. Um, and they're at home, so they're going to be playing with aggression. I think it helps them having Dubois start. I'll be honest. I think Madut is kind of a little bit up and down. I'm not sure if he's a point guard or a two guard. He started off at the beginning of the season. You thought, oh, actually, this guy's a pass first guard, but he's not really been as much of a pass first guard. The last few games, he's looked for his own shot a bit more. I'm not sure they really need that. I thought with DeBose starting, and I referred to this when we were talking about the other Manchester game, that let Ashton Langford be aggressive.
mm,
Newcastle have had a number of slow starts this year. At times, it's kind of almost like the scorers need time to get in the game, and they don't really have the ability to throw the ball down low, particularly to Del Pesh isn't a post threat. So they need their scorers to get going, and there's a few times this year that hasn't happened. So yeah, they got off to a hometown start, I think is the best way
mm.
of saying. But what kind of has happened in games like this is that when Newcastle played them, is that their scorers have kind of started getting into a rhythm.
Well, it was Long with 8 points, and then James with the three. Eagles with a 15-4 run in the opening 3.5 minutes of the second quarter to lead 28-30. And then end of the first half, Okoro banks in a three on the buzzer, 42-46. He continued that on into the second half to push it out to 48-58, 4 minutes in.
Yeah, and I watched this game yesterday, and there wasn't that much to say about it. It was two teams being kind of what they are. And I mean, I think Robin and Jace were on the commentary said it was a well played game, and it was. They were both doing what they were doing.
Mm,
Um, Newcastle had to avoid it getting into a scoring race,
mm,
and they just did. They just got enough stops at times, and just challenged enough shots. So it was very much Ashton Langford playing almost off the ball,
mm,
who kind of brought Manchester back into it. But he brought them back into it with contested 2 point jump shots. He was pulling up and making tough shots. And that means that down the stretch, if you're not getting the layups and you're not getting the easy threes, it's harder to score the ball. I thought that's what happened in the fourth quarter. Um,
So just to get us there, Irvin and Mitchell with threes and a 10-0 run to
yeah, that was a
61-59. It was 73-73 with 6 to play. Okoro and Knight combined to push the Eagles out to 75-84. Manchester did get it to three inside the final minute, but they never quite, to me, looked like they were going to get over the hump. And I was watching
no.
this.
I mean, there's a
I
couple of things.
rewatched this when I got home the last 2 minutes just to check I'd missed anything watching it from the sidelines in Cheshire.
I mean, yeah, there's a couple of things. I mean, one, Knight kind of took over in the middle of the fourth quarter. And when he gets going, he's a tough guy. He's a tough guy. So he scores in spurts like he did in the final. And gave them that kind of that cushion that they had going in the last 3 or 4 minutes. Also, they brought Defoe in, and Mark actually referenced him in the interview afterwards. Darius came in with 2 minutes to go in the third quarter, and he really, when Manchester was scoring a little bit easier, and defensively and ball movement wise at the far end, he really helped them quite a lot. And he played like 10 consecutive minutes all the way till Pulliam came back in to handle the basketball.
Mm.
So he made a difference in taking the game away from being a scoring race and making Manchester continue to shoot tough shots and just giving a little bit of defensive positioning and physicality. But the biggest thing is, Okoro. Okoro is now he's. I was thinking about it this afternoon. He's probably behind Thompson. He's probably the next in line for MVP in the whole league. Because you go through the team, Sheffield have lost Chapman. London haven't really had anybody. Rye is obviously up there, but he hasn't really dominated much this year. Not
No,
probably to the
no,
grave he has
no.
last year. And the only thing that what separates probably in the car was carried Newcastle at times, and he's dropped 30 points on nearly everybody now.
Mm.
And in this game, again, it's almost like with him, when he comes off an average game, he comes, we had like 15 against London, but he was never really in it. He comes off with a real kind of mental focus and a real force to his game. And 33 and 4 and 3 or whatever he had was pretty impressive. Now, that said, got to night, Manchester stuck around. They made some tough shots. Ashton Langford made some tough shots. The 1-3 that you talked about, Irving made was on the shot clock buzzer from 35 feet. Um, and they've got shot makers. Um, and they actually were better in the last 3 minutes when they put some pressure on Newcastle
Mm.
because Newcastle kind of had a little mini Leicester in
Mm.
the trophy semi-final and turned the
Yeah,
ball up
yeah,
three
yeah,
times.
yeah,
You
they
know,
did.
and that's
That's
why
why I watched it back because I watched it and I was like, did I miss something? I watched it back. I thought, is it worth it? But they did get, as I say, they did get it to three, but Newcastle then
well, they
scored.
did, but they pressurised a little bit more. Their
Yeah, they
defense was a
did.
little bit more
Yeah, yeah,
desperate, and they're going to
yeah,
have to play like that
yeah.
more often. They've got depth, they've got size, they've got length, they've got energy, right?
Mm.
They can't be as passive defensively as they are. For me, they are passive defensively, and they're not connected defensively at times. There was a cut in the Sheffield Manchester game, about 3 or 4 times. The ball went to the baseline, and you had Sheffield guys cutting in front of Manchester players, face cutting them, going right in front of their face to get easier layups. And it's like that's just not being connected to your help side, not being aware of where everybody is.
Mm.
They defend a little bit too much like individuals for my liking. And they're perfectly capable individual defenders, but the extra passes tend to beat them. And they're gonna. I think I think they're gonna be better if they go eyes out and just pressure,
Mm. Yeah, yeah,
and use the bodies they've got. Whether the players are willing to do that, or whether they're too more, they're more interested in saving their energy for their offense, I don't know.
mm.
But I can't see. I don't think they're going to get any more coherent, any more cohesive. I think they just need to play harder defensively, put them under pressure. And when they did, they got a turnover off James. Dubose got a turnover off James at halfway, which resulted in
Yeah,
a 3-point shot. Then they pressured the inbounds and Akaro pushed off, which resulted in an inbounds foul. And then they pressured the next inbounds and they threw it to Long and threw it to Akaro, who fell out of bounds. That was 3 turnovers in a minute and a half,
yeah,
all brought about by ball pressure.
yeah,
And you say, well, why are you leaving that to the last 90 seconds of the game when you've got a roster as deep as you have?
yeah, yeah.
That's a mentality thing. So they allowed Newcastle to make enough shots to win the game. Newcastle actually are harder to guard without Ward Hibbert because when you've got James as that third guy
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
court with Okaro and Knight, then then all three of them are kind of good enough to score the ball, but not too selfish, if that makes any sense there,
yeah,
you know. Whereas Ward Hibbert's kind of the energy guy, might get you rebounds and all of that stuff, but he's not as efficient a scorer as also. But Newcastle aren't as good defensively without Ward Hibbert. And the reason that Ashton Langford was able to score the ball as comfortably is because Ward Hibbert's been guarding the point guard the whole
mm,
season so far, basically, and harassing the point guard. And now they have to give somebody else the job, and it's harder. Um, but overall, yeah, it was a kind of a good separating win for Newcastle because they were Manchester are now 5-9, and they would have been 6-8 if they'd won. Newcastle now 7-7, it would have been 6-8 if they'd lost.
yeah,
It was a
yeah,
two-game
yeah,
split.
yeah, yeah.
And Manchester just have this. Manchester's going to be careful that they don't let any more games split, any more games slip that winnable games. You don't get bonus points for losing by 6 every week.
No, no. Ashton Langford, 25 points, particularly at home.
Yeah.
Ashton Langford, 25.7 rebounds. Mitchell, 19 points and 9 rebounds. KO, 13 points. Okoro, 32 points. James, 18 and 8 rebounds. And Knight, 17.
Mhm.
Caledonia Gladiators 68, Surrey 89 is 77. DeVille Ramsey in for the Gladiators, and the first game for Johnny Bunyan. And Daryl Wood was back as well as
Arrow was back as
assistant
well.
coach.
They've got to have the hair quotient. They
Yeah,
have to have
yeah,
the hair on the base,
yeah,
on
yeah,
the sideline,
yeah.
Yeah, there is a kind, it's almost like, I got off at Newcastle Airport um, on Sunday morning, a bit jet lagged, I haven't got back from Philly. And I'm sitting there waiting for my case to come around.
Mm.
And I'm thinking, my God, this is like the Caledonia Gladiators coaching situation. It's like if you wait long enough, they'll all come back round again. Like not coaching, but playing.
Yeah,
So it's like
yeah,
it was Johnny and Daryl. Now
yeah,
Johnny was
yeah.
who's next on the conveyor belt? Cuddly toy.
Mm.
Bit of generation game going on for those of us who are of a certain age.
Of an age.
Um, just like that. Was it Larry Grayson? Wasn't it?
Larry Grayson.
Yeah,
Just like
yeah,
that.
just
Just
like
like
that.
that.
That was Paul Daniels.
Oh no, yeah. So shut that door was Larry
That door
Grayson,
was Larry
wasn't it? Shut
Grayson.
that
That's right.
door. Yeah,
Three word. You see.
yeah.
Three-word slogans were popular well before Get Ready, Get Done. Exactly, and they were just anyway. So yeah, and yeah. I, I think it's probably the most rational thing they could have done.
Mm,
Actually, I think
mm,
in the season of great irrationality, I think
mm,
hopefully they're back where they are, where they need to be. And signing Ramsey is also a rational thing because he knows the league and he's busy and he is determined and disciplined.
mm,
Probably not the most offensively talented guard in the league, but he's still certainly good enough to improve that team. And they actually, to be fair to Caledonia, in this game, they actually looked like a basketball team for most of it,
mm.
as opposed to a disparate bunch of ex-felons and drug smokers. Um,
Allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah. Well, they're
The,
gone now, they're not suing us.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but they look
Whoever.
like, no, seriously, to be
Yeah, yeah,
serious,
yeah,
they look, with Teddy running the team. Teddy's a proper point guard. Pat
yeah,
Whelan, we all know how good Pat Whelan
yeah.
is. And then they just struggled a little bit at the wing spot. Toto is still a project. It is a struggle to win games with Toto. He does so many good things, but he does so many things which hurt you as well, and out of good intent. But he's just not quite there in relation to being a wing in this league. Defensively, he probably is. Defensively, he is on the ball certainly, but offensively, it's hard. And then and Surrey are very set in what they do and how they do it. And so yeah, first it was the game. I'll use this later because I thought about this one. Surrey at times, they play like the San Antonio Spurs of 2013-14, and the ball is pinging around and
Mm.
everybody's shooting it and everybody's scoring. Other times they play like Tottenham Hotspur of January 2025.
Where
Um,
even Leicester City can beat you.
where even this is whereby just all goes. And this
Yeah.
game was an utterly bizarre game of 6 minute, 7 minute segments where
Well,
one
I
team
was
dominated the other.
I was about to say whoever coined the phrase "basketball is a game of runs" was
Yeah,
talking about this game. So let's work our way through the runs. Surrey with an 8-1 run to lead 7-15. Caledonia with a 14-0 reply, 21-15. The next run depends where you want to draw the line, but it was sorry, it was either 18-0 or 24-2. It's up to you to choose the start and end point in that, but it's 30-42, and Gladiators only 4 points in the second quarter.
yeah, remarkable. 28-4. Have you come across a bigger disparity in your quarter scores? 24 points difference from one quarter to the next.
I've had no time to look at it, and my friend Alex asked me about when was the last time a team doubled their score from one game to the next, because Bristol went from
Yeah, because Bristol are
59 to
better.
122.
Well, I mean, this was it was. It's firstly Lloyd did a great job in running the zone out because the zone absolutely bamboozled them. It may as well have been written in kind of Sanskrit and Chinese puzzles and Star Trek 4D chess
Mm,
because they basically Caledonia just basically ended up jacking up threes and they weren't good threes and they weren't threes which were being put up by shooters because Whelan was off the court at that time.
mm,
Ramsey was playing his first game. There was very little coherent cohesiveness in dealing with the zone, and he stuck with it, and that's kind of what really befuddled Caledonia. But also, it was a kind of a first game whereby Johnny is working out what he's got and what lineups he needs to
mm,
run.
mm,
And there was one lineup which was extremely good, and there was one lineup which was basically unplayable.
mm,
And you have to give people a chance to become involved. You had the young lad Stevenson in at the end of the first
Mm,
quarter, which is
yeah.
fine as well. No point setting the message if the kid's doing well enough in practice, a little bit like Carney, and put him in the
Mm,
game and see. Um, but they also the second unit has to have a focal point as well,
mm,
and it didn't really, particularly against the zone, which results in you having to democratize the way you play. You have to move the ball against the zone. You have to get good shots. They didn't figure it out. They didn't get the ball at the high post. They didn't get the ball at the corner, and Surrey absolutely kind of picked them apart. And then at the other end, again, Surrey got into a rhythm. And Surrey get into a rhythm, they are really, really good,
mm.
really pretty to watch offensively.
So Gladiators then scored the next 14 points, 12-0
Yeah.
start to the third quarter to lead 44-42. And then I'll let you pick your Surrey run again. You can either have 21-2 or 13-0 to lead 48-65. Thought Lawrence with some big plays at
I
both
think
ends of the floor in
21-2
that
does
spell.
it, but it's the
Yeah, yeah,
two,
yeah,
it's the
yeah.
two. You can't, I mean, the Gladiators plus minuses in this game were really, I mean, Barnes was like a plus 20 or something,
Mm,
or Kane was a plus 20 in 21 minutes and they lost by 10,
mm,
so they lost the minutes he didn't play by about 30.
mm,
And I think he's just going to have to figure out who he needs to have on the court and who can play and who can't play.
mm, mm.
The problem is that everybody else is doing this in August and
Yeah,
September,
yeah, yeah.
and they're doing it in January against teams that are set. And there's no gimmies in the league that you
February
can
even.
look up to in February now,
Mm,
So it is a little bit of a poison chalice insofar as it's going to be very, it's kind of your Alan Shearer 8 games to go with a dysfunctional Newcastle team and Michael Owen who doesn't want to play in case he gets
yeah,
injured next
yeah,
contract.
yeah.
How are you ever going to solve that when you're the fourth manager in the season? And so it's kind of the same way. And the problem is that the games kind of drift past, and as the games drift past, they get more and more dispirited. That said, Barnes is playing exceptionally well.
Mm,
Whelan and Okafor are perfectly capable backcourt, and Ramsey's a perfectly capable backup. And so, um, and Onwas is a veteran who's won before.
mm,
So that there isn't any reason why they can't win basketball games, but they're gonna have to put 40 minutes together,
mm,
as a team, and in this game they didn't.
mm,
And unfortunately, when they were good, they were really good. But when they were bad, they were pretty
mm,
rudderless,
mm,
you know. So he's going to have to be a little bit more ruthless going forward as to who's on the court and when. I'm sure
mm,
that will come. Figure out what he needs, who's going to win and who's not going to win, who's going to help them win and who's not going to help them win. It's a good win for Surrey. They needed this win. Surrey dropped this game. They're like 4-10 or something like
mm,
that.
mm,
Um, and 4-10 for a team that we actually given quite a lot of compliments to,
mm,
really isn't cutting it. You got to win games ultimately, and they looked after. They took care of business. As I say, I thought Lloyd coached a really good game. The zones really, really impacted them, and he got and Cholovinskis
mm,
really impacted the game as well positively.
mm.
So they've got to kind of get
Lawrence too. Lawrence in
Lawrence.
that
Oh, Lawrence
in
always
that
does.
spell.
Yeah,
In that spell,
Lawrence
he
as well.
was
I mean,
really, really good.
I take Lawrence as a given because
Mm,
he's a starting guard playing off the bench. You know what I mean? But kind of the extra stuff. I thought helped them. And Jordan Hunt, they got a
Yeah,
game
he
of
was
Jordan
good.
Hunt.
Yeah.
So, and Hunt in the middle of that zone is actually a bit of a target, because he's 6'10", he does fill the space, and if you're not really attacking it in the right way, then he can impact the game positively. Hunt coming back does help them a little bit. It means that Adelican doesn't have to play maybe all the minutes they've had him playing. Um, but at the end of the day, at this point in time, you are meant to beat Caledonia,
Mm,
right? Maybe not in 3 weeks' time, but at this point of the season, every other team in that league should be looking at Caledonia. This is a game we need to win
mm,
because they are not where they need to be. They're not the finished product.
mm,
And so they did take care of business, and so that they did the job that they had to do. It was a big win for them.
mm. Gladiators did have one more run, but it was only 8-0, so never enough to get all the way back. Whelan 16 points and 7 assists. It's worth looking on the play-by-play just to see scores this side, scores that side. It's really weird.
Yeah, I can,
Uh,
yeah.
Whelan 16 points and 7 assists. Kane 16 points and 6 rebounds. Barnes 13 points. James 17 points and 9 rebounds. Gooden 13 points. Hunt 13 points and nine
Yeah.
rebounds.
I think Kane is going to be a kind of a bellwether going forward for them because he scores the ball really easily, but he also knows he can score the ball really
Mm,
easily.
mm,
So in the middle of the run at the end of the first and the beginning of the second quarter, he chucked up some shots which really weren't great shots.
mm.
which means the coach has to then decide, well, do I keep him in? Do I take him out? Because I've got, and you end up only playing 21 minutes in this game. If they get 30 efficient minutes out of him, they're going to be in a lot of better place to play. But whether he's capable of giving them efficient minutes
Mm.
is going to be the big thing. Because he was brought in obviously by Robbie Pierce to play a different way,
Yeah, yeah.
as one of their three-headed, yeah.
Careful. Let's go to the last game. Cheshire Phoenix 94, Bristol Flyers 122. So as Alex pointed out, they doubled their score from one game to the next. A crazy game in the context of Friday night. Bristol basically won this game in the first 5 minutes. Robinson beasting inside, Sheffield hitting threes. They scored the first 22 points of the game.
Yeah, which is bizarre. I don't think I've seen that. I mean,
No, I can't remember.
there's a game we played against Durham many years with Trey Moore, probably first year on the bench,
Mm,
where we were up a lot to zero in the first quarter. I don't remember how many.
mm,
I do remember that I was incredibly annoyed that Trey allowed Paul Elderkin to shoot a jump shot with
mm,
about 2 minutes to go, which got them on the board.
yeah.
And he was even more annoyed by Trey's response, which was, "I'm just seeing what he got." We're trying to shut it.
Yeah,
I didn't know he had that. We told you he had that. I mean, Paul Elderkin can shoot.
yeah, yeah.
Anyway, so that
And,
was.
and let's be fair, Durham weren't the offensive talent that
No, of course
Cheshire
not.
are.
And Durham were
Yeah,
first
yeah,
year in the
yeah,
league,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
I only say that because it wasn't a 5 minute thing. It was more of kind
Yeah.
of we'll hold them scoreless.
Mm,
But yeah, Cheshire started. I'm afraid like a team that had won a lot of close games, but didn't realise that they had been winning close games.
mm,
That their force, their energy, their intensity wasn't quite there. Obviously, you have to remember that they won the game at Surrey with contributions from their bench, with
mm,
Austin and Tyreek Scott
mm,
Grayson doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and the starters. They're quite a combustible team, Cheshire. I mean,
mm.
I'd like to get into Nick Timberlake's head because there's a lot of stuff going on there.
Yeah,
And I'm not
yeah,
saying he's not a talent. He is a talented guy. Clearly, he's
mm.
been around. But he's quite just he gesticulates. He's quite
He does.
demonstrative and all
He
that
is
stuff.
very demonstrative.
And that stuff can kind of wear a little bit on teammates if it's not, if it's not kind of accepted, and maybe it is accepted.
Mm,
Maybe people the guys say, "Oh, that's all right. We know who it is. It's the heart's in the right place." But I don't know that.
mm,
I don't know whether that does or not. Um, so they are, and obviously Skylar is combustible. Energy is all energy. Cameron Holden, Larry Austin. They're built. They're built for that. So that's what they are. That's fine. But the thing with emotion is that emotion can lead you to great highs and great lows.
mm, mm.
And this was a great low.
Yeah.
The reality is, so that's why I'm saying you have an emotional team. And of course, when you throw in the fact that Jared Sheffield really needs to sign there next year
Yeah, he does. He needs to play at
because he shoots
EPS3 every week.
77% from three or something like that. And Bristol, it's the mental folk. When I talk about players being tired, it is not the games that tire players out.
Mm,
Players could play games every day. It's everything that goes around it. It can be travel, it can be lack of routine, it can be lack of stretching, it can be all of that stuff. It can be it's mental fatigue more than physical fatigue. Mental fatigue, you think, oh, they've played 4 games in 7 days, they're going to be mentally fatigued. You're not mentally fatigued when you've just been beat by 35,
mm,
when you've just been beat by 20 in the trophy final. That
mm,
that is mentally sharpens you.
mm,
So they are sharper now because they are desperate to win. The competing motivations in this game are far more desperate for Bristol than they are for Cheshire.
mm,
It's just probably like the London Newcastle game. London were
mm,
desperate to win that game. Newcastle did not give that impression they were desperate to win that game,
mm,
because of just where they are in the season. And to be fair to Bristol, as I say, I thought they were pretty good at Leicester in the first half,
mm,
and they came out and they did everything that they were meant to do. Johnson's back in the starting lineup, which I think is right. I think
mm,
he gives you something. I think he has to play 30 plus minutes, and if he doesn't play the first five, that means he's basically playing most of the rest of the game.
mm,
Um, and they had probably what you'd think is just about the most natural lineup with Johnson and Walsh starting. So they've got two guards. They've got Sheffield at the three, and Lewis and Robinson. And I think they tried with McCormack in the starting lineup to go big, maybe out of necessity, but I don't think it worked. And I think he's right to go back to where they were, whether it's going to be Louis who starts with Johnson going forward and Walsh off the bench, or Walsh who starts. It doesn't really matter. It gives him a positionally more comfortable. Puts the players in more comfortable positions
Mm,
to know what they're doing. Lewis has played that with skin. Robinson had a bounce back game,
mm,
and they just it's different scoring against Cheshire inside to scoring against Leicester inside.
mm,
You don't have Abercrombie 6'9". You don't have Thompson 6'8" in not elephant arms, albatross arms. You don't have all those other guys not letting you past you. It's just a totally different game, and they played like they enjoyed the fact that it was a different game.
mm, mm,
And the problem is, Cheshire might beat them 110 to 109,
mm.
but they're not going to beat them 110 to 109 if they don't score a point in the first 5 minutes.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
You
The
know,
reality is Cheshire scored 94 points in 35 minutes.
yeah, absolutely. But but we know, what 106, 103 in Newcastle in 40 minutes.
Yeah, yeah.
We know how many points they need to score to play that way, and that's why they're ultimately going to be a team you really don't want to see in the playoffs.
Mm,
But you don't see them also winning, multiple consecutive games with a level of consistency that you're going to need to kind of cross that gap to get to the top of the league.
mm, mm,
That's what that said. I wouldn't want to be the team that plays them next,
mm. No.
which is Newcastle on Friday night.
Oh, is it?
Um, um, uh,
Well,
so
that's the rearranged game as well. It wasn't meant to be there. They were meant
yeah,
to
it's a
be at
rearranged
home.
game, and
Yeah,
given that Newcastle are coming off a game in Estonia on Wednesday,
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know, you know that's not the team you want to see coming back
No,
off
no.
coming off a Friday, Sunday, Wednesday in Estonia,
Mm,
Friday fourth game,
mm,
and because now Cheshire are going to be absolutely locked into that game because
mm.
Ben will have no doubt laid a few things out for them.
I'm sure.
But
I'm
that's
sure.
what they are. As I say,
Yeah,
it's emotion, so it's up and down. They're going to be
yeah,
up and
yeah.
down both in game. They're unique this season in that they're up and down in games,
Mm.
emotionally. Um,
Well,
most teams
because the
up and down
random thing is,
between games.
even though the lead barely got under 20 for the rest of the game, for much of it, you still thought Cheshire could have a run here. Cheshire
Well,
could have a run here.
Andreas thought that because he kept
Yeah,
those guys in.
yeah, yeah,
He kept his guys in virtually till the end.
yeah.
And he kept Johnson until the end. He was playing starting five at the end of the game.
Mm,
He was kind of making sure, sending kind of a message to his team that this is what this is what we have to be.
mm,
Um, and of course, Bristol now have a fantastic opportunity because they got Sheffield two games on Friday, Sunday
mm,
in the cup,
mm.
and they have an opportunity to put right the wrongs of 2 weeks ago
Yeah,
of
yeah,
last in the
yeah,
final.
yeah.
So they're at that point whereby there's a team in Bristol, there is a team there.
Mm,
But I think they need to be Louis. They need to figure out what Louis's role is.
mm,
Louis is in shape. He's now been there 2.5 months. He is good. He can play.
mm,
He's a different type of point guard to what Johnson was. Is he going to start or is he going to come off the bench? Is he going to lead the second unit? What are their rotations going to be? Because they have a number of talented players,
mm,
but they have to be comfortable where they're at. And I think he needs to. My perspective, I think I would start Louis and Johnson, bring Walsh off the bench.
mm.
I think. Um, but obviously, I'm not in the locker room, so I don't know. I'm not in the practices, so I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah.
But I see Louis as the type of guy who'll be better over 30 minutes than he is over 18,
Mm,
just because of he has kind of that capability to influence the pace of the game. Whereas Walsh is a guy who's head down and he's just going. He can
yeah.
just go and influence the pace of the game off the bench in a different way. So I think naturally Louis is a more natural fit for starting point guard spot. And if you then have, say, Samuels is playing the other minutes, it simplifies your rotation because you've got your point guard spot taken, and it simplifies your rotation with Johnson and Walsh and Sheffield.
Mm,
And those three guys can basically split minutes at the 2 and 3 spot, which then gives you Lewis and Robinson, and you've got McCormack and Smith coming off the bench to spell them as well. So it's a more natural fit for everything. A lot of them comes out of Sheffield though. He's a 30 point a game one guy, he's 6 points a game the next. And he can shoot the ball when he's comfortable. He doesn't look like he's going to miss, but when he's not comfortable, he doesn't look like he's going to get close. He's a weird type of thing. So yeah, in Cheshire, just chalk it up. That's what we are.
mm.
That's how we play. We weren't ready to play the game. Just stay together, stay with each other, keep playing hard, and just chalk it up. That's all they can do.
I've written down Sheffield 19. It must have been 29 rather
Must have
than
been
19.
29.
Yeah,
Gee,
yeah,
this is
yeah.
getting 1 point for threes.
He was 8 of 14 for three. Eight is his career high makes for three.
I mean, that
Johnson.
said, it says something about Cheshire. I mean, he just lit you up in the semi-final. It's not like this is a surprise to you.
Mm,
I mean, like they really aren't that concerned about the quality of shot that they give up. They're more
mm,
concerned about getting the rebound and running down the other end.
mm.
Particularly the 3-point line, and that's, as I say, that leads to a
It's a
certain type of
problem when there's
game.
no rebound.
It is a problem when there's no rebound. Yeah,
Mm,
it's a problem for the other team when there is because they're three on
yeah,
two at the other end and they're scoring.
yeah, yeah.
But it leads to a certain type of game,
Mm,
and if you're going to have that type of game, you've got to take the rough with the smooth.
mm,
But that said, somebody at that team has to at some point become a stopper insofar as a guy who's made four threes already.
yeah,
When
yeah.
Sheffield's 4 or 5 from the 3-point line, 4 or 6, somebody has to say, okay, you ain't scoring.
Mm,
That's part of the game as well.
mm.
And you haven't really seen that in any of them at the moment.
No, no. Johnson, 24.7 rebounds. Lewis was 8 of 9 shooting for 21 points. 17 of 28 from three. That is the most Bristol have ever made in a top flight game. 122 was their most points in a top flight game as well. Timberlake, 6 of 10 for three for 26 points. Austin, 19.6 rebounds, 5 assists. And Scott Grayson, 6 of 9 shooting for 17 points.
Yeah, the number it's kind of inflated. Numbers are kind of inflated when you're playing a game
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
great for the stats. It's great for the players at the end of the season.
Mm,
But
mm.
that's kind of the type of thing that kind of makes recruiting a little bit difficult.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, because
yeah.
what's worth more? Is it the Thompson's 14 points for Leicester and 11 rebounds, or is it you know Robinson's 20 points for Bristol against Cheshire? You've got to try and figure out you know how impactful they are in certain games.
Yeah.
Actually, it's probably not the best game for Bristol because they're going to come in a little bit confident against Sheffield,
Mm,
and they're going to, semi-final, which should change, which should take the edge off. But if that was a league game, I would have kind of an issue with it for them. But I think with the two cup games, I think they'll be pretty focused.
So let's quickly run through the table. London and Sheffield still joint top, 11 wins and 4 defeats. Leicester still just behind them, 10 wins and 4 defeats. Cheshire are 8 and 7. Newcastle 7 and 7. Manchester 5 and 9. Surrey 5 and 10. And Bristol 4 and 6. Caledonia are outside the playoffs 2 and 10. It feels almost like there's three sections to that, but I don't know where Bristol are in those.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. That's particularly that separating game between Manchester and Newcastle.
Mm,
Um, that it has done it, and certainly the circumstances of Cheshire, which we just talked about,
mm,
and Newcastle primarily with the European stuff going on as well.
mm,
I don't see either of those teams being able to kind of put a 7 or 8 game league winning streak together to kind of, which is what they need to do to kind of traverse that gap.
mm,
So it is, I think, the top three. In relation to Bristol, where they are, they're probably just below the Cheshire Newcastle group simply because of the amount of games they've got to play.
mm,
They got 22 games left. They're playing none of them this weekend, so that's another week gone. Then
mm,
they'll play the week the following week, and then there'll be a national break. So it's just going to build up to a remarkable degree for them. And I don't see them against that schedule, against the teams in this league being in a position to win 7 or 8 or 9 games in a row.
mm, mm.
I don't see that as feasible. Um, so with them, I know you count losses, but the league we're in this year, it's almost about counting wins as well. It
Yeah,
really
yeah,
is.
yeah, yeah.
We haven't played the games, there's no guaranteed wins. And then and Surrey, Surrey and Manchester have the ability to win multiple games, um, but they have to win close games.
Mm,
And there were three. Surrey had the shot against Cheshire, the three down with 90 seconds to go. Manchester had two shots this week
mm,
and lost them both.
mm,
So they just need a little bit more clarity in late game situations to get the wins that they need. And it doesn't, as I say, it doesn't matter if you lose by two or you lose by 30.
yes, I see.
It's still a win. It's still a loss.
Yeah.
And Caledonia will be a spoiler, and they could. They've only what they 2 and 11, 2 and 10. Is it
2 and 12.
2 and 12? So 2 and 12. So 18 games to go. I mean, what if they go 10 and 8, they get to 12 wins.
Mm,
Can you see them going 10 and 8 against the teams that they've got to play? Probably not.
mm.
you know, because they're going to be playing London and Leicester and Sheffield, and you know, and I don't see them beating everybody else all the time either. So maybe they win 8 games, 10 wins. Does 10 and 22 get you into eighth spot? Possibly. That's why the whole playoff thing of 8 out of 9 is a bit of a
Yeah,
is in because it gives everybody the opportunity.
yeah,
But it's also competitive nonsense, you know, because it doesn't eliminate enough teams. But from Caledonia's perspective, it
yeah, yeah,
keeps
yeah,
them in with
yeah.
a shot and keeps the fans coming. And
Yeah.
we talked about the fans at the
That's what the
beginning of this.
playoffs are
We
there
could
for.
finish
The
with the fans at
playoffs
the
are
end of this.
there. Whatever anybody says, the playoffs are there. Trust a man who was there before playoffs existed,
Yeah,
there to make this bit of the season interesting because
yeah,
otherwise there'd be nothing to play for most of the league if
that's
you
true.
didn't
I
have the
do think,
championship.
however, that there's a better way of dealing with it than 1 1 8 2 7 3 6 4 5. I think
Yeah, I mean you could have a
needs to
top
be a bigger
six and do
reward.
something.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a bigger reward. The NBA's got playing games now.
Mm, mm.
You know, I think there needs to be a bigger reward for the team that are top two or top four.
Although Chris Finch was it Chris Finch that bemoaned the structure where you had more games to play at the for the lower seeds
Because it
because
gave them
they
rhythm.
gave them rhythm and they just got beat in the final by an eighth seed.
Yeah, by Leicester. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I get that.
it was all single elimination as well,
It
which
was
I
all
think
singular. Yeah, and that was it was a toss of a coin. I mean, you've got the eighth seed with like Ralph Blaylock, Larry
you've got an
Johnson.
eighth seed that shouldn't have been below
Yeah, you've got
508,
was it
which
Blaylock,
is
Johnson, and who was the third guard you had?
Blaylock, Johnson, Malcolm Leake, Billy
Malcolm.
Singleton, Carl Brown.
Yeah, Carl Brown. You know, I mean,
Yeah,
they were a relatively stacked team.
yeah, yeah,
That thing, and individual talent against Sheffield's team oriented basketball and
yeah,
one-off games, individual talent, can win. And Malcolm Leake was an individual talent.
yeah. He certainly
He
was.
certainly was. He's individualistic, and Ralph, I've watched Ralph for years at
Yeah,
Newcastle. He
yeah,
was pretty good as well.
yeah. Larry
Um,
Johnson. Did I say Larry
Larry
Johnson?
Johnson, yeah,
Larry
Larry
Johnson
Johnson,
as
yeah,
well.
he
Yeah,
was
yeah,
athletic too, God, wasn't he?
yeah.
But yeah, but I still think even if it's six players, you have to find a way of getting 8 teams in there. But I'm not sure that 8 should just get a free run at the first seed just like that. I think that's not a 9 team league.
Mm,
I think that's a bit, and it's a bit like college basketball. In college basketball, all the teams get a shot, but
yeah, yeah.
the top teams don't come in until the quarterfinals or something like that. I'd have to think about it more, but yeah, anyway, it is what it is.
It is what it is, and we will be back next week to talk about all the action once again as we've trailed. There are cup semi-finals going on this week, and hopefully we'll only be talking about the
No,
action
I'm waiting for
next
I'm
week.
waiting for the next letter.
No,
I want the next letter out. I want this all played out in public. This is great. Yeah, keep going. No, I know what you're saying. It
yeah.
is just nonsense.
It is. It is. So we'll be back with our own variation on nonsense next week. But for now, goodbye.
Oh, just sorry,
Go
just
on.
before we
Yeah.
say goodbye,
Yeah.
those I know we don't clip this, right? But if anybody wants to clip Dan's first 5 minutes, that is Jeff Stelling-esque about Middlesbrough. That was Jeff Stelling-esque about Middlesbrough. I am absolutely in awe of that. That was. You can defend me. You can do the final speech in my trial any day. Thank you.
Oh dear, you've got a long stretch coming.
Uh,
On that note, we're going. See you next week, people. Goodbye.
Bye, guys.